Gregor Robertson is the Liberal candidate for Vancouver, Fraserview South, Burnaby. Melissa Lantsman here in studio is the Conservative candidate for Thornhill. Laurel Collins is the NDP candidate for Victoria, and they're all with me now. Hello, good to see you. Thank you very much for making the time. I do have a number of questions on policy in the policy pitches today, but first, Mr. Robertson, I do have to ask you about the sort of big story emerging today politically. I know that it's ultimately not your decision whether or not Mr. Chang stays or goes, but given what we know now about what he said, despite the fact that he's apologized, but what he said about his then Conservative rival, are you comfortable with Mr. Chang also remaining as a Liberal candidate?
Well, first and foremost, I'll just say his comments were absolutely unacceptable, I think, to all of us that are his colleagues. And he has apologized. He's taken responsibility for those comments. So I think we all agree, as Mark Carney has expressed, that he continues. But obviously that apology and responsibility are absolutely critical to this because his comments were totally unacceptable.
But if they were totally unacceptable, and if your party was sincerely recognizing the severity of making a comment about someone who actually does have a bounty on them, would there not be a more pronounced consequence for that? Like, I don't understand how, you know, a country like China, where 4 Canadians were executed, where the Michaels were detained for over 1,000 days, like how that is not taken more seriously by your party.
Yep.
Well, I think it is taken seriously because if he had not taken responsibility for his comments and agreed that they were absolutely unacceptable, then this would not be happening. He would not be continuing. So he's taken that responsibility, apologized directly, and that's what counts here, is making sure that those comments have been pulled back, apologized for, and he's being held accountable for that. But we need to move on with the campaign, and he's worked through his whole life serving his community, 28 years as a police officer in his community with a stellar record. So this, this mistake is very unfortunate, and I know it creates some hard feelings, but he's taken responsibility for it as he needed to.
Just very quickly, Joe Tay, the individual who has the bounty on him, does not feel like it's easy to move on. And he said the apology is not accepted. Doesn't that stand for something?
Well, I think when someone makes an apology like that, a heartfelt apology, I think that needs to be recognized in this situation. And, it's a very politically charged environment. We're in the middle of an election campaign. So, of course, the other parties, everyone involved against him will run this up the flagpole, so to speak, and make a big deal out of it. He's taken responsibility. He has apologized profusely, and that's what's important. And I think it's time to recognize that and move on from it and focus on issues that are really critical right now that we heard announced today, whether it's on housing, which is definitely the biggest issue in my city and in many communities across Canada, energy that was announced today as well. We had big issues come out today, and I think those are really critical for Canadians to hear about.
Yeah, and we're going to do an entire discussion about that. I promise. I just want to get your colleagues to respond because I do think many things can be important at the same time. Ms. Lantsman, Mr. Robertson's point is that the apology is sincere and that there should be some credence given to that. Is that not possible?
No, what Mr. Robertson just said is that we should focus on other things, that parties are making a big deal out of this. Canadians should take this seriously. It is a dangerous, dangerous thing to suggest that you should take a bounty out on another Canadian citizen, threaten their lives. This is completely disqualifying, and it actually speaks to Mark Carney's judgment. If Mark Carney can't stand up to Paul Chang, how is Mark Carney going to stand up for any Canadian? If this is what's allowed in their caucus, when a man's life is already threatened, and somebody goes out and says, "I'm going to take, why don't you turn over this guy to the regime's consulate here, Beijing's consulate here in Toronto for cash. Why don't you kidnap him and take him there?" That is a disqualifying statement for any individual, but particularly for a sitting MP.
And I certainly would not take away from the seriousness of what you just said. But your party isn't also a stranger to candidates that make statements or that appear in pictures that they shouldn't, and you don't automatically give them the boot if they recognize that there was an issue. Is it not possible that he made a very bad mistake?
This is somebody who is encouraging Canadians to kidnap somebody and turn them over to a hostile regime.
So there's no room for the
There's
apology.
absolutely no room for an apology here. This requires either a resignation, or what it actually requires is for Mark Carney to make a decision, to stand up to Paul Chang, to tell him that he's out of line, to fire him as a candidate, and to make sure that the Canadians feel safe.
Ms. Collins, I want to bring you in and just get your reaction as well. I'll put the same question I did to Ms. Landsman to you. Is it not possible that that apology is worth something, and that some deference can be given to it?
No.
Ms. Collins, are you there?
Yep, I'm still here. Can you hear me?
Yes.
I do think an apology is necessary, but also you would hope that he would step down on his own. And if he doesn't, I think Canadians are pretty appalled right now. And I think about communities who are scared about the threats from foreign governments. They have come to Canada. They think that they are safe to speak out against human rights abuses, to speak up for justice and, for what they believe. And then to know that a sitting MP, a candidate in the Liberal Party, then encouraged people to turn someone over for a bounty. When I heard Mr. Robertson say we need to move on now, I think a lot of those communities don't feel like they can move on right now. And until the Liberal Party takes some responsibility for this, takes responsibility for saying to Canadians that this is somehow acceptable, I don't think a lot of people are going to move on.
Okay, and we will discuss this later with the front bench. I do technically want to move on to the policies that your party's announced today. And Mr. Robertson, I'll start with you on housing, which of course you have a lot of time and have experience with, given your previous role as the mayor of Vancouver. Your party today is proposing an expanded role, essentially, for government in housing to address the crisis that persists. But though you yourself weren't a part of this government for the last 10 years, that government, that Liberal government, allowed immigration levels, for example, to rise to a level where they then had to drastically cut them back. They insisted just a few short years ago that housing was a provincial responsibility until they were forced otherwise. Why should Canadians watching tonight trust anything your party is saying about the government having an expanded role in this, given its own track record?
Well, I think first and foremost, and the reason that I'm running in this election, is we have a new leader in Mark Carney. We have someone with a business background who's been really good at executing, creating jobs, and focusing on economic growth. So we have a whole new approach here with the Liberal Party, and lots of us, like myself, coming to the table with deep background in building housing, in addressing affordability in our cities, when it's been very difficult to do. And certainly in the years that I was in office as mayor, I had a conservative government, the Harper government, for my first 7 years, and it was disastrous dealing with them on housing. There was no priority on affordability or on housing. There was no support from the federal government, which made it extremely difficult for us as a city, as it did in Toronto. And that's now spread to cities and communities all across Canada. This is a problem that's gotten worse and worse over the years. And that's even with the Trudeau government putting more focus, far more focus than the Harper government did, in bringing forward a housing strategy and significantly increasing the funding support. What Mark Carney has done here today is the most significant commitment on housing and affordability in Canadian history. And it's really taking the best ideas from our past, from post-war building period, from the 70s and building rental housing in the cities in the 70s. It's taking all the good ideas and putting Canadians to work, creating jobs, building homes at a scale that we've never seen before, in partnership with the private sector, and really delivering on the homes that are needed across Canada, which is fantastic news for all of us who've worked on this for many years in cities.
But you used a key word there, right? Delivery. Because the best laid plans still need to be executed on. And I'll put to you again, I mean, I take your point about other governments, but you were mayor, and it's not like the situation in Vancouver improved drastically. People there are still struggling enormously to be able to afford a home. I again put to you the question, are we supposed to, as Canadians, believe your government can execute on this plan, though it has no track record as a party of doing so over the last 10 years, simply because the person at the top is someone different?
Well, it's not only that Mark Carney is making this commitment as a leader and making this one of his top priorities coming in. It's also that we have a deep bench in this. I bring that experience from my city, and we have candidates with very diverse experience. We have Amarjeet Sohi, who's just been the mayor of Edmonton. We have candidates who are stepping in now because we have a new leader who's sending these signals that we need to create jobs, we need to build housing, we need to partner with the cities, with the provinces and the private sector and the Indigenous communities, and we need to build. And we as Canadians, we know how to build, but you got to line everybody up. And that starts with the Prime Minister. It starts with getting the Canadian government back into building, Build Canada homes, and making sure that the government is very focused on incentivizing and investing in affordable homes. That doesn't come from the top as a top priority for us. We won't get all the critical players on the ice to deliver the housing. And I think we can do that now. I think the pieces are lined up. Mark Carney's our Prime Minister. We are going to deliver like never before across Canada.
A really long way of saying yes, that's what I think.
Ms. Landsman, your party today is pitching an energy corridor to essentially expedite the process of something like building a pipeline. I was reading into the details, though, of how it would work, and it still says that it would require pre-approval from all levels of government and First Nations. I don't understand how that's any different than the process that currently exists. How will you, for example, speed up the construction of a pipeline that Quebec doesn't want?
Well, look, first of all, I think we've got to step back and look at the issue in this country and the fact that, C-69, the no new pipeline bill it exists. It is something that Mark Carney is still behind. He wants to keep our resources in the ground. He wants to keep our critical minerals in the ground. And we know that because he's effectively said that his entire career. In fact, he was the advisor to the Liberal government when they made those decisions. We have lost out on 16 projects, $176 billion of lost economic opportunity because we can't get the stuff out of the ground and we can't get it from coast to coast. So particularly in the face of the threats that we're facing from down south, we need to build an east-west economy, and that's exactly how this is going to happen. We're going to get the premiers together, make sure that we pre-approve that and give investors the confidence that they need in order to invest in projects here. With a pre-approval and a route to do that, I think we can get things built in this country. And now we've got a country that seems to agree. We've got 75% of Quebecers now wanting to see their resources, wanting to see a pipeline through Quebec. So this is part of that plan.
But the Bloc, for example, is not saying that they would endorse something like that. Premier Legault is not unequivocal about something like that. Again, I don't understand the discernible difference between what you're proposing and the issues that have persisted prior. And just as a matter of factual basis, I mean, production is up on oil and gas. There is LNG Canada that's going to come online very shortly. TMX does get our oil out west. It has increased the GDP by 0.5% on an annual basis, and the Liberals did get that built.
There is nobody in this country that doesn't believe that we're not squandering the opportunity here that we have. We should be the richest country in the world. We all know that. We've got everything that everybody wants below our feet. We've got oil and gas. We've got we've got LNG. We've got critical minerals. We've got uranium. We need to get this stuff built. And there is only one party that's actually serious about doing that, serious about building the economy, bringing home the investment that has fled here, attracting proponents to build those projects, create jobs, do it with Canadians, with Canadian steel, to build Canadian pipelines, to Canadian refineries, and expand our markets beyond the U.S., where we're selling that stuff at a discount.
Are you willing very quickly, though, to override the opposition?
Well, we're certainly going to fast track approvals to critical projects, and where we have and where we can and where we have the jurisdiction, we're going to make sure that those approvals are ready, set, and go before that project even starts.
Okay, Ms. Collins, last to you. Your party unveiled its climate policy today, which included the removal of the consumer side of the price on carbon. Yet you kept a party in power for the last number of years that had that consumer carbon tax. You did not use your considerable leverage as a coalition partner or supply management partner to force them to remove that. Why not?
Vashi, I've been on this panel before, and I'll say the same thing. The consumer carbon price has never been the be-all, end-all of climate policy. It's unfortunate that the Liberals kind of propped it up like that, but it is, we could actually strengthen our industrial carbon price. We're proposing making the biggest polluters pay their fair share, ensuring that we actually meet our climate targets, but we also eliminate fossil fuel subsidies, billions of dollars that could be spent on supporting everyday families, workers who are struggling with the cost of living. We want to reduce their costs. We want to reduce their emissions. And we want to make sure that people feel supported in making greener choices. People are trying right now, but the biggest polluters, the biggest corporate polluters, they are doing the opposite. They are making massive profits. They are increasing their emissions, and they're getting taxpayer-funded subsidies at the same time. And both the Conservatives and the Liberals want to keep those subsidies in place.
I mean, those subsidies largely go to incentivize carbon capture, which ultimately is supposed to work to help reduce their emissions. On the idea, though, as you're presenting it, of reducing costs for Canadians, how can you guarantee that an increase in the industrial carbon price isn't transferred to Canadian consumers, number one? And number two, you're also proposing a border adjustment for countries that we trade with who don't have the same industrial price on carbon, like China and like the United States. So is that a tariff on a tariff on a tariff that already exists? How much more costly with your plan are you making life for Canadians?
Well, the thing about a carbon border adjustment is it actually protects Canadian workers and Canadian industries here. So for countries who don't have an industrial carbon price, who aren't making the biggest polluters pay their fair share, then we need to actually protect our industries here in Canada. And honestly, what you said about the subsidies, first of all, the subsidies that this Liberal government has given out to help profitable oil and gas companies who have been making record profits reduce their emissions, they could regulate those companies. They could actually get them to pay for their own emissions reductions, pay for their own pollution. But unfortunately, they haven't done that. But there are also billions of dollars in subsidies that are going to oil and gas extraction and new developments. There was just a report out about the billions of dollars that this government continues to hand out to profitable oil and gas companies. We could take those billions and we could invest them in supporting families who are struggling right now. Let's bring down their energy bills with retrofits. Let's help them bring down their emissions, support workers, support everyday families here in Canada.
Okay, I've got to leave it on that note. I'm sorry. We'll be back. I hope next one you want more. I know everyone has more to say, but I've already gone 20 minutes. I'm in trouble. Thanks, everybody.